Back in 2018, when Disney first announced their plans to open a Star Wars hotel, my family and I were pretty interested. Something like this has never been tried before, and has the potential to become one of the next big things in themed entertainment. The concept images looked great, and we were all pretty excited to check it out. Then the price was announced. And it was a lot. Like an obscene amount. At this point, my family had already committed to going, with the reservation set for mere weeks after it opened, but I started to get pretty nervous. Especially after the first promos came out, which did not shed a good light on the resort, to say the least. It looked incredibly bland and honestly just bad, especially with the extreme price tag put on it. As time went on though, and more videos came out, my nerves eased a bit, but I was still absolutely skeptical about how my experience on the Galactic Starcruiser would turn out, which is where this video comes in. After my trip a few days ago, I took a few days to collect my thoughts and make this mini review of what I thought of the experience, both good and bad. I don't mention all of my thoughts in the video, so please comment below if you'd like a follow-up, or if you have any questions about what it was like. While you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe as well. With all that being said, here are my thoughts on my stay at the Galactic Starcruiser. Let's start with the good, because there is a fair amount of it. That begins as soon as you enter the hotel, with its fantastic service. Not only was the parking valet, but the employees took in and out our luggage, which was definitely appreciated. Even on our departure, when we were told to take our luggage out before 8 AM, they were still happy to help even at around 9 AM. There were plenty of amenities they provided as well, from portable chargers you could use around the ship to water bottles during the excursion to Batuu. Each and every one of them were extremely nice, which is to be expected from Disney employees. But it even seemed a step above that in terms of service. I also thought it was funny how they weren't just fancy, but space fancy. Like instead of saying you're welcome or good morning, they said my honor and good journey. It was almost like even the service was themed, which was pretty funny honestly. Speaking of the employees, another great thing about this trip was the actors. The scripted performances on the balcony of the atrium were fine, but they really shined when interacting with guests on board. The First Order leader, Lieutenant Croy, was one of the standouts, being surrounded by kids that made fun of him constantly, leading to a sort of verbal sparring. Honestly, it made me glad the ship wasn't just full of middle-aged Star Wars fans. It wouldn't have been nearly as fun. Even though the story itself wasn't too strong, it didn't really matter to the overall experience, as I managed to keep track of the plot and characters throughout most of the journey. There's a side plot where the background dancer alien is jealous of Gaia, and by the end is signed on by her manager. Little touches like that were nice, although that specific instance did seem a bit out of nowhere for me considering I wasn't able to do that mission. Actually, let's talk about the missions for a second. As far as I'm aware, there are 3 paths you can take: the Resistance, the First Order, or a Smuggler. There were a lot of dialogue options presented on our data pads, which meant to lead you down a certain path, but by being indecisive, I somehow managed to max out my trust with literally everyone. Despite that, I ended up getting put in the First Order path, which ended with a mission in the engineering room, and another on the bridge. I enjoyed those missions, but being stuck on one path did mean I lost out on others. Another member of my party said they helped to rescue Rey at about the same time, and it seemed like there was also a B-plot with the really cool looking green alien lady I mentioned earlier. Even with that, I feel pretty satisfied with the missions I did there, although I felt like the days were almost too packed with stuff to do. But I'll get to that later. Let me finish up with some smaller good things. Even if I didn't love all of it, I thought the food was pretty unique, and there was definitely a huge variety of items, good and not so good. That led to some great stuff like this weird looking grilled cheese, but also stuff I'd never even consider putting in my mouth, like the big blue shrimp. Next, even if they were a bit simplistic, I did end up enjoying the games on board. That may be because my brain gets satisfaction from literally just hitting levers, but that, paired with the collaborative gameplay in the engineering room and bridge, really helped to make it more enjoyable. That also applies to Sabacc, which is this unique card game you can play physically or with the holo Sabacc table. The holograms weren't entirely convincing, and the dice roller didn't work all the time, but it was still fun to try during a slow point in the day. But that's where my complaints start to come in. The main one being how everything is just crowded. I do mean that in a physical sense, but also in a time sense as well. You arrive at the hotel at about 1 PM on the first day. Then the second day you head to Batuu in the morning and return to the hotel in the afternoon. Finally, you leave the morning of the third day as soon as possible, with the latest time to leave being 10 AM. That may seem like a decent amount of time, but that proved not to be the case. Let's take the second day for example. The excursion to Batuu, aka Galaxy's Edge, is meant to take place between 9 AM and 4 PM. Despite that, we got a mission at our hotel for 3:15 PM, meaning that we had to go back early if we didn't want to miss it. While this wasn't a huge issue for us, the mission seemed to be a pretty important plot point, and while guests who weren't there were filled in a bit later, they still missed out on something due to the tight schedule this experience has. This also led to me having little to no time to actually take in the ship or enjoy anything. And while it's somewhat great we were busy all the time, I wish there were a few more moments where it slowed down a bit. Again, this complaint is partially a compliment, but the point being I think another day would have been appreciated. Another way it felt crowded is in the more literal sense. The rooms are tiny, especially for a hotel this expensive. I get that this experience is meant to mirror an actual cruise, but for the price you're paying to go on this imaginary one, I think a bit more than this should be expected. There's only one full bed with an additional pull-out bed and 2 beds within the wall. I slept on the wall bed, although I probably shouldn't have considering it was pretty uncomfortable. I'm 5'11", but surprisingly did manage to fit in bed, although it was a bit tight. But with no real mattress and a cover that was essentially a sleeping bag, it wasn't what I'd call a luxury experience. This all feels more the product of budget cuts than any thematic reason, and unfortunately this is one issue I can't see them changing in the future. Now let's get into the theming. I'll admit for the most part it was better than I thought. However, the aesthetic they chose means that most of the ship is filled with a lot of boring white walls. I kind of understand why, and it does fit in with the Star Wars ship, but it doesn't feel extremely detailed, apart from a few small things. The lighting helps to improve this at times, but there were other times where I felt that it could have been improved a bit. One thing that really bothered me in regards to theming were the scratches on the stairs. In the story, this is supposedly where a lightsaber battle took place, but the scratches are just painted on there. That and other stuff on board looks more cartoony than immersive or realistic. Even the screens weren't extremely convincing, although I wouldn't call that the fault of Disney. It's just hard to make any screen seem like a window. Finally, and this is sorta related to the space thing, but I wish there were some extra rooms in the hotel. Like, you have the engineering room, the 2 restaurants, the climate simulator, and a bit more, but after the first afternoon, I felt like I had already explored everything the ship had to offer. Luckily, the missions made that much less of an issue later in the trip, but I still wish there were like 2 or 3 more rooms. So, with all that being said, what did I think? Well, first off, I'm just amazed with how this all works. The ever-changing schedule in our data pads, bringing each group to separate missions, worked really well to allow people not to run into each other. My group did both the bridge training and lightsaber training on our first day, while we saw others doing bridge training in the afternoon of the second. What's even crazier, apart from all the windows changing when the bridge training happens, is that bridge training seemed to change with the plot throughout the day. While we were out fetching Gaia, others later in the trip seemed to be fighting off First Order ships. All of that makes me so curious how this all works together, as it does so surprisingly well. In terms of my conclusion, well, I honestly thought it was pretty fun. Putting all the good together, it was better than I thought it was going to be, but it's hard to ignore the more negative aspects, especially for the price. There are some things I wish were better, but I think most of it is set in stone. That includes the story, more specifically with the time period, which I doubt will change considering Galaxy's Edge is pretty strictly set in between episodes 8 and 9. With that, I'm confused how they'll convince people to come back, or get new people to join in when the rich Star Wars fans run out. The future of this hotel is definitely a mystery. But rambling aside, I think the Galactic Starcruiser is pretty good. Not as great as it should be, especially for the price again, but nonetheless good for what it is. With a bit more time and money put in, I think this could have been a much better experience, but in its current form, I did find it fun. Thanks for watching one of my longest video essays yet. I do have more to say about this experience, so as I said before, comment if you'd like to hear an even more detailed breakdown of the Galactic Starcruiser. Be sure to leave any questions you might have there as well. Again, thanks so much for watching, be sure to like and subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you all next time.